welcome to OSB Miniature Studio, and this time I'm showing you how I paint Warhammer 40k shipping containers. Now these are used to scatter battlefield terrain in games of 40k and Necromunda, and for me it's forming part of my Necromunda diorama. Most importantly, a food outlet that's all shuttered up, but there's one Goliath inside ambushing. So I'm going to take you through how I painted the interior of it very quickly and how I paint the entire exterior using various weathering techniques that are very useful on a variety of both Necromunda and 40k terrain. So I hope you enjoy. Let's begin. So I start off with the container having been zenithal primed, and then through my airbrush I give this a coating of Dark Reaper. Mix this paint myself using Army Painter airbrush paints rather than thinning down actual Dark Reaper. The mix I use is 1 part black paint, 1 part Dark Sky and 3 parts Iron Wolf, but alternatively you could do this step by thinning down some Dark Reaper or just applying this with a brush. Once that coat's dry, I then pull apart my container and place the grill that I've made using leftover parts of a Ridge Runner, and I give all of this an undercoat using Lead Belcher Air. I do this sporadically, not trying to coat the whole thing, trying to leave some of the areas dark, but I give this a very quick blast throughout the interior. Once this is dry, I combined the container back together, keeping it dry fitted, and then using an Army Painter large dry brush and some Citadel Skegadon Scale Green, I give this an overbrushing. To overbrush, I apply this onto a slightly damp Army Painter dry brush and work it into a piece of hardboard that I've got lying around, and then basically just give this a stippling and overbrush effect, not trying to coat the whole thing, just trying to get a bit of variance in that texture. This really adds to the weathering of it. Once that stage is completed, I take some Vallejo Game Wash and I apply this all over the outside. Now with the Game Wash, I stir this rather than shaking it up because it's actually got a thinning agent inside that when you shake it up it goes really bubbly and frothy and horrible. It's a great alternative to non-oil, especially for larger projects like terrain. Once this is dry, I take some Fenrisian Grey from Citadel and a large graduate mop brush. You could use a makeup brush for this. These are just great large surface dry brushes because they're very soft. And I give the whole piece a dry brush with the Fenrisian Grey. Once completed, I start taping off various parts of the model using some modelling masking tape. This piece here is 6mm thick, and then I use one of my sculpting tools just to gently press this down. This is a sculpting tool with a rounded edge so that it's not going to scratch the paint too much, but again I do this very gently, taking my time to ensure that the area I want taped up is done. Next I'm going to do the yellow areas, and for this I do an equal parts mix of Demonic Yellow and Desert Yellow from Army Painter. Taking an old flat dry brush, I stipple this all over very roughly. I'm not trying to perfectly cover this, I'm trying to replicate that industrial look of quickly slapdash painted metal. Once this is dry, I take some sponge, and these ones are washing up sponges, very cheap to buy in large packs. I tear some up and pull off little bits over the face to get it uneven, and then using some Army Painter Moonstone Yellow, just give this a gentle stippling over the yellow surfaces, again just to add some variance and chipping to it. Take your time with this, less is more. Now on to the red half of my container. So I take some Vallejo Black Red, and using the Army Painter medium dry brush and my hardboard again, I overbrush this, same as I did with the Skegadon Green. Taking my time to build this up, again using an old blade dry brush, working into all the tight areas to make sure that as much of this is covered. Again though, I'm not too worried if there are areas that are not covered because it replicates that roughly painted look. For the next part, I overbrush this using Dragon Red from Army Painter. To add chips to the red painted areas, I like to use a peachy colour, so in this case I'm using Barbarian Flesh from Army Painter. Again, less is more with this step. Now taking my same sculpting tool, I carefully lift up and gently peel away my masking tape. I then reapply the masking tape the other side of the stripe. To protect the red and yellow from the next stage. Again, using my sculpting tool, I gently press this down. Not too concerned with it being too straight, again going for that rough industrial look. Start off with an overbrush of Army Painter Banshee Brown before giving all of this a coat of Pallid Bone Speed Paint. Once that's dry, I give it a further coat and shade of Army Painter Strong Tone. You could use Agrit's Air Shade instead of this. Next, I give it an overbrushing using Army Painter Skeleton Bone. And then removing the tape, the middle stripe is complete. So now we're concerned with the inside of this building. So I'm going to take this cooker apart and give the coals in the grill a quick coat of a matte black. I'm going to give the outside of the barrel that forms the grill the same paint process as I did with the yellow. I'm now going to use hammered copper just to add interest and a different metal colour to some copper areas on this cooker. Just picking out the water container and some of the valves and outlets on the cooker. I give the oil drum a sponge chipping of moonstone, and then taking some lead belcher, I just give a very light dry brush in some areas of the metal just to pick out the edges. I take some Army Painter Dragon Red and give this overall dry brush to the coals as well as the surrounding area to give a slight red glow. I follow this up with some Army Painter Lava Orange, again with a dry brush over the coals and then slightly closer to the glowing coals for the surrounding area. And then a final dry brush using Army Painter Fire Lizard. This is a nice warm yellow colour and very good for doing glowing effects. Returning to the outside, I get some gunmetal by Army Painter and give the shutters a dry brush. Next up, I'm just picking out some decals from my NECROMUNDA set. For these, I don't bother to use any decal fixers or softeners. They're very straightforward on terrain. So just using some clean water, I first soak the decal, and whilst that's soaking, gently dampen the area. I then use my hobby scalpel to pick up the decal and a clean brush with water on it to slide the decals off. Once these are dry, I use some Army Painter matte varnish just to seal these decals to the container and to reduce the shine of them. Using some cheap hobby acrylics from a local art shop in burnt sienna and burnt umber, I give the whole container some chipping. First starting with the burnt umber for a darker colour, again using the same washing up sponges, slowly building this up, and then switching over to a slightly smaller sponge with the burnt sienna for lighter rust and chipping. Again, taking my time with this, concentrating on areas where I think weather would build up. To tone down the inside of the container, I next give this a coat of what I like to call magic wash, or parts lamy and medium, a flesh wash and a black wash. Once this is dry, I take some Homebrew black pigment powders and I give all round the cooker and grill inside the container a brushing of those pigments just to add some burnt effects. Last up, I use some Green Stuff World liquid pigments, which honestly guys, these things are brilliant, to go around the brass with some verdigreen and to go around the metal areas with some medium rust. I pick out the external details with some Vallejo Brassy Brass, and then taking some lead belcher, go around and pick out all of the rivets on the outside of the container, along with any chips and bullet holes and dents that I've added. I do the same for the vents on the sides of the container and also for the keypads. I paint up the servo skull of the keypad with a base of Army Painter Banshee Brown. I then paint the keypad with some Army Painter Speed Paint Gravelord Grey and then some Pallid Bone Speed Paint to the skull itself. I go round all of the bulbs of the external lights with some Army Painter Spaceship Exterior, heavily watered down, before returning to the skull and giving this a highlight using Army Painter Skeleton Bone. Sneak preview of my gangers for this diorama. Taking this ganger, I'm going to glue him inside. He's got a pin in his foot already, and I'm just going to glue him down using some super glue, because I'm now going to take some plastic glue and seal this container up for all time, hiding all that work I did to the cooker on the inside. But if you lean right in, I bet you can see it. You can. I didn't waste my time at all. Next up is an oil wash. So I use some Sansador, which is odorless thinners, and then I do an equal mix of Winsor Newton black and burnt sienna. I thin this down to a wash consistency that I'm happy with. I test this on the side of the pot just to make sure it's running, and then using an old brush I apply this over the whole model. Before applying this, I did give the whole container a varnish of satin varnish from a spray can. Once I've left this to dry for at least 20 minutes, I take some makeup sponges and some clean Sansador odorless thinners and start removing the oil wash in a downwards motion to create streaks down the model. I also use some smaller makeup sponges to get into the harder areas. I think these ones are for eyeshadow when you buy them on Amazon or eBay. After 24 hours of this drying, I then come back in with some Green Stuff World medium rust liquid pigments and then some light rust pigments, and start picking out areas that I think rust would gather on. So lips, crevices, anywhere where dripping water might gather on this container. Very thin fine liner pens, and start adding tags to the outside. I've got some references in a sketchbook that I've sat and sketched out. I just work my way around adding all kinds of graffiti before finally adding my gang's graffiti, which is JPJ for Jank Point Jackers. I do this as what's called blockout graffiti. This is a very simplistic graffiti that anyone could do. I then take some Liquitex red ink and apply this to the servo skull's eye for a glowing eye effect, before taking some Liquitex titanium white ink and gently airbrushing this over all of the external lights. Taking my time to do this very gently with the airbrush, building it up in layers. I then take a mixture of Army Painter Prismatic Bolt Speed Paint and Liquitex titanium white ink and apply this in a thin coat over all of the lights to give a bluey green tint to my lights. I then give the whole piece a coat of matte varnish and the piece is complete. Now I've put this piece together for my NECROMUNDA diorama, which will be progressing in several other videos, but I hope by breaking it up into these smaller videos I'm able to show you how you can take these painting techniques and apply them to your own NECROMUNDA or 40k terrain. If this has been of help to you, please take the time to leave me a like or subscribe. Go over to my Instagram page to see more photos of these completed projects. Go ahead, leave me a like. It will make you feel better. It definitely makes me feel better. By all means, put your own comments down below, share with me your projects. I really do enjoy interacting with all of you. So all that's left to say is until next time, you are a wonderful person who is definitely destined for hobby greatness. Thank you for taking the time to watch the whole video, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.